Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and today is the 17th day of April 2021. And what I want to talk to you about is pertinent, and I think it's some wisdom that I can offer you about the issues of traumas and how we, as single people, if we haven't worked these out in our lives, that is, with trauma that is taking place in our lives, we really don't need to be actually participating in getting married with someone else until we deal with that issue. I was talking to a couple female ladies, and one who is a friend of mine. She was sharing with me that how, if you haven't dealt with these traumas in your life, in your single life, then what happens simply is you bring that trauma into the marriage, and then it becomes bigger than what it was beforehand. And not only that, it creates more problems if you have children. And so this is a way to be. What's the best way I could say this? This is a way for you to basically get your act together before you get married. Now, I've never been married. And I'm glad I have not in many ways, because simply is that I do have past traumas that I've not dealt with, and I believe that what's happened simply is that we've been sold a pair of goods to basically to jump into a marriage. We see this in movies. We see this in movies. You look at the movies that are displayed on YouTube, and it's always this happy go happy after you fall in love and you get married. But they never show anything about anything to do with marriage. You see, that's the end of the flick or the movie. And in reality, simply is people are actually what I call it, depending upon the other to make them whole, when it's your responsibility yourself to be whole. And what I mean by whole is simply is you're not traumatized by certain things in your life. You see, we were whole when we were born into this world at a very young age, or we would call that either whole or innocent or essence. And the pressure from family members have forced us as children at a very young age to take on the personality of our parents. And with that, the loss of innocence. So Gertrude talks about this in his books. Basically, the first 5 or 6 years, the child is innocent. Now, that was over 100 years ago. But you know that parents now send their kids to pre-K. That is, some parents send their children to, at 3 years old, they're sending them in school. So it's a much earlier period than what it was Gertrude was talking about over 100 years ago. And so what is taking place here is the child is losing its essence now at a much earlier period than it was 100 years ago. And many parents would say, well, I want my kid to get educated and be better for life, and to be able to take on life and to tackle it and such and such. No, that's one of the worst things you can do for a child. This is also the attitude as though the experts know better than you as a parent. You know, these people who have got these PhDs and whatever else behind their names, is that you think they know something, and all it is simply is, yeah, they know a lot of knowledge, but they don't know anything about real life. And that's your child. That is not their child, but your child. And so it's your responsibility to know your child. It is your responsibility to come to the recognition simply is let the child enjoy itself at an early age. Do not try to manipulate it. Do not try to force it into a particular cog or a square or a round. It's like a round hole when in reality is simply there's no such thing as a round hole, you see. And, she was reflecting to me. I thought it was really critical what she said. She made a mistake. She got married, I think, at 20 years old, and she had not dealt with her traumas. And eventually she divorced, and now she's on her own with 2 children. And she's come to recognition simply she should have dealt with her traumas before and this is the whole, this make-believe world, this attitude simply is that my husband or my wife is going to solve my problems, when that's not being truly you. You're actually expecting someone to pick up and carry you when the other partner is thinking the same thing about you. The man is looking to the woman to say, well, she can get my act together. Or, the woman's thinking, oh, this man can solve my problems. What a recipe for disaster, because both are looking for each other to solve their problems when in reality they haven't solved their traumas at all. So in my thinking when I was talking to her, and I've talked to other people, is this thinking as though marriage is going to take care of everything and solve the problems with our traumas. And that's not going to happen. It's not. There's no way it can. So being wise is to wait and deal with your traumas before you enter in a relationship. It's to your advantage to do that. Because not only do you cause harm to one another, so the relationship is destroyed, and if you have kids, it's also going to be causing harm to them, because they're going to see things simply as I did as a young child. Is my parents didn't get along. They had traumas. And I would look at them at a very young age and saying, what are you arguing about? What are you dealing with? Because see, the whole issue simply is with my parents, they would argue about simple things, but there was an underlying huge problem with what we call insecurities. And they both would be fighting one another. And I don't mean physical fighting, but it could come up to that way. And all they did was simply they created the insecurities in my own life as a young child. And I was like, just get along. I can remember saying that, why don't you follow what scripture says? Why don't you get along, such and such. And they didn't do that, see. And so the critical thing for people to understand simply is that people have this idea, it's a make-believe world that someone's going to fix them. And there's no one going to fix you, folks, except you. You're responsible in fixing yourself. You are your own savior into dealing with insecurities, traumas that took place in your life. And naturally, people go along and they just, they jump from one end to the other. In other words, they jump into one relationship and it doesn't work out. And they jump in another particular relationship and another deal. And simply all they're doing is they're not dealing with the main problem. The problem is the one that's looking in the mirror, and that's you. You need to deal with your traumas. You need to see these things. You need to go back into your past and say, why do I act this way? Why do I act this way in a way that simply is I want my way? Or it simply is that forgiving your parents for what they did. Your parents, in reality, didn't know what they're doing, but most of you don't know what you're doing. You see, at a young age, you make those mistakes too, thinking that somehow this whole thing of this magic of love, so to speak, is going to solve this problem. And all it does is it doesn't solve that problem at all. And so this is not a long video, but my point simply is that you need to deal with your own traumas. You need to understand simply is that no one can heal you. You must heal yourself. And I think even as I think about in my life, just a short thing simply is that my parents knew, even at I'm being 60 years old now, my parents are both passed, they would somehow, and it's even worse now, is that they would solve that problem supposedly thinking that they would buy me toys or do things special for me at my birthday parties or at Christmas, buying me these presents because they felt guilty in what they had not done. They did not spend time with me as a child. They actually were so busy in their own way, in their own lives. And so they felt guilty that they wasn't providing for me or my brother. And they would buy us these presents. And within a month or two, we had already lost interest in those presents just about because they didn't solve our problems neither or get love from that. And you see this even in families that the children come to their parents, but they really don't want to be there. They don't want to be there with them in the Christmas time, or they don't want to be with them at other special times because simply is that there's trauma still in those families. There's hurt feelings. There's people are hurting and they don't know how to express that. And the problem simply is you have to solve that problem yourself. You cannot put it out on someone else. You know what the problem is now, so you must deal with it yourself instead of actually pushing it off on someone else. And that's the easiest thing to do in our society today is to push that on someone else and say, well, it's their problem. No, it's your problem, you see. And we don't want to look in the mirror. And many of us, I know in the past, I've known women who get married to get married. They're not in love with the man. You see, they're in love with the marriage. They're in love with what we call, there's pressure from their friends that they're all married. So I need to be married, or it's not just the women always, it's the men also. Well, I need to settle down, such and such, da da da. And I need to be da da da. And so there's this pressure too, simply as well. All my friends are married. They have someone special and I don't have someone. So I'm going to pick whatever woman that comes along, da da da, and I'm going to, choose them, such and such. And you're setting yourself up for, heartbrokenness. You're setting yourself up for hurt. And these things can be eliminated. And then if you have children, it's far more complicated. It's no longer you and your mate. Now it's a child or two or three. And so that enters a picture. And yet you have yet to deal with your traumas. Now, somebody say, well, hey, gee, Brent, you're being pretty negative here. But I've talked to a couple of women, 2 or 3 women that have given me wisdom in sharing these things. Simply is the best thing to do is not to be married. It's not to be married until you deal with your traumas. Because what you're doing is you're not only not being grown up in that perspective, but you are actually putting hope in someone else is going to solve your problems. And so you give them that burden, give that burden onto them when it's not their burden. But I'll say this much. Both parties who do this, the guy and the girl, both have their traumas, you see. And they're not being grown up about it and being an adult. they're going to pass it on to one another, you see. So it's best not to get married until you deal with these traumas. And maybe this is the key thing, simply is to look at it one way. This is how you can grow up and find a good mate, is to deal with your traumas. And if you deal with your traumas and you dealt with that, then you can find someone who is truly doesn't have traumas. You can see that in them also. And they're not putting that on you, you see. So this is some wisdom I can share for others out there, hoping that they will glean from this and not make those mistakes, especially those that are much younger than I am, and can see that basically this is not going to solve the problem, and that it will create more problems in your life. And that's why many people get involved in other relationships in a marriage, or get involved in alcoholism in order to cover up that, or they think it's going to solve that problem. Looking for something beside themselves, again, is something that it's an internal work, it's an inside job. Instead, you look to alcohol, or you look to drugs, or to pornography, or any of these things to basically try to fill that void in you, when in reality simply is it's you. You must deal with that. So I hope that this will help all out there, and I appreciate you for listening, and I wish you a good day. You take care.